You may be seated. And let us pray. O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our salvation. Amen. Today I want to talk about one of my spiritual heroes. He's a painter, best known for Western landscapes. You've already heard his name, Chiura Obata. He was born in Japan, 1885, and he had this vast skill as an artist. He was recognized very early. By 15, he was already in Tokyo in a fancy art school. He'd won awards. He was making money illustrating books and portraits. But he gets sick of this. None of it fulfills Chiura Obata. He longs to travel, to see more of the natural world. He can no longer bear to just think about these things secondhand. He yearns for direct contact. Those are his words. When referring to nature in Japanese, he never uses the word shizen, which actually means nature. Obata always uses the phrase dai shizen, which means great nature, as if to emphasize the sublime nature of the contact. So this young painter, Chiura Obata, he travels to the place in the world he thinks he can experience dai shizen most directly, the United States of America. Because both then and now, unlike Japan, America still had these vast stretches of undisturbed natural splendor. He arrives in Seattle in 1903. But at the time, of course, there's this wave, as sometimes there is in American history, of prejudice against Asian immigrants. During the first few years in Seattle, he's assaulted on the street, he's spit on frequently. And this makes it very difficult for the painter prodigy to assimilate or get a job even. 6 years later, he's still working as a laborer, now in the hop fields of the Sacramento Valley. The work was very difficult, but Obata sustains himself with the vast, open beauty of the American countryside. He says it fills him with awe and wonder and quietude and stillness he puts into all his work. So for the art historians in the room, eventually Obata gets discovered by the San Francisco art scene. He was grounded in his training in the Zen Buddhist principle of painting. It's called Kinshedo. It means the living moment. And so his work is utterly unlike anything that people in America had really seen that much of. It's just astounding, amazing. He becomes known for this immediate, alive, intuitive quality. Zen artists, if you don't know, they will spend hours in solitude, quieting their mind so they can receive the essence of their subject. Obata once says, "The mind must be as peaceful and as tranquil as a calm mountain lake. Let not a shadow be cast upon it, that the altar of beauty be untouched without a ripple, without a thought of self-conceit or egotism. Only thus can genuine art, overflowing in praise and inspiration, be evoked from great nature." Chiura Obata. There are no galleries I know of where you can go and see his work. So you're going to have to go home and Google image search Chiura Obata, which is the worst thing to do, of course, but I don't think we have anything else. I don't know of any other way. But for me, his art always reflects that deep well of spirit and aliveness that I believe all of us encounter whenever we brush up against dai shizen. And I believe all of us do. All of us. Especially those of you who grew up here in the Northwest, you know who you are. At some point or another, I hope, pray, all of us finds a tranquil moment, or maybe a peaceful place of solitude out in nature, where we recognize that the world might actually be far more alive, with scary intelligence and heart, and even gallows wink and a nod humor than we are ever led to suppose by our biologists. Am I right about this? Anyone had this experience before? Raise your hand if you feel a little moment. Okay, for those of you who did raise your hands, I want you to think about that place and that feeling. Because this is the natural context for appreciating Obata and his work. He once said, "When I enter into the bosom of great nature, I believe it as a direct kind of God blessing to me. And this is why I do not belong to either Christianity or Buddhism. The stillness and tranquility of nature." This was most palpable to Obata at night, which he called his great teacher. He once said, "In the evening when it gets cold, the coyotes howl in the distance, the moon arcs through the sky, and it is very quiet. There are trees here and there. And if we immerse ourselves in this nature, in this quiet, we too will grow and be taught." Sometimes it takes someone from outside of our own cultural context to remind us and show us those things that were always right under our noses. Here in Oregon and in Washington State, where I grew up, the forests and the mountains and the oceans are everywhere. They are ubiquitous. They are all around us. We see them every day. We see them so much that maybe we don't see them. The things that become invisible are the things we see every day. That's what they say. And this is true not just about the landscape around us. It's true for our wisdom traditions as well. It doesn't get much emphasis throughout Christian history. But the actual parables or poetry of Jesus has a very similar quality, once you take off all the tradition, to the paintings of Chiura Obata. Teachings like our ancient testimony that Antoine read for us earlier instruct by pointing a finger to great nature. For Jesus, the spiritual life is not something that can be learned. It's not something that you have to obey or be accustomed to or accomplish. Rather, for Jesus, in his own words, the spiritual life must be grown. For Jesus, the spiritual life, for it to flourish, the soil has to be right. It can't be too rocky. It can't be too shallow. We're reminded that we are never separate from the wider field of creation all around us. It's not just this thing or that thing. Jesus talks about the totality impacting on the individual. He reminds us that the same waters flow through everything. He says this again and again. And providing a model for discipleship later, Jesus says famously, "Remember the lilies of the field that do not toil and spin with worry." But not just the lily. Jesus teaches us by pointing to the mustard seed, the fig tree, the thorn bush, the birds of the air, the foxes of the ground, and even the storms, and even the high waves that threaten to topple our boats, that all respond to his command. Jesus reminds his followers of something that even 2,000 years ago had already been forgotten. That we are nature, that nature is us, and that something profound happens whenever we quiet our thoughts, immerse ourselves in nature, and allow its essence to be revealed, because it reveals itself. It does, only every time. Back to Chiura Obata. As the years passed, his kind of prestige grew. He got married, he had 3 kids, He ends up being a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. This is where he was when war broke out. This is where he was in 1941 when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. He was 56 years old, and this was in December, of course. 2.5 months later, very quickly, FDR signs Executive Order 9066, and that's it. Chiura Obata and his family, like every other Japanese American, regardless of whether or not they had green cards, regardless of whether or not they were citizens, regardless of whether they were citizens who had never seen Japan and never spoke a lick of Japanese ever in their lives, all of them were literally round up in public spaces. They were put on ferries and buses and trains, and then they were shipped out to prison camps in the middle of nowhere throughout the American West. Fun fact, this actually happened. Here is Obata's account from April 30th, 1942. And fair warning, the first part might sting a little. We were gathered at the First Congregational Church in Berkeley, and we were sent to a stable after that. While I was there, waiting for the bus, there was a soldier with a gun. And there was a child, 5 or 6 years old, not knowing anything, with childlike innocence, playing with the soldiers, playing hide and seek at the edge of the street trees. At the time, it strongly hit my heart that these small children who have to go to school and have to start learning knowledge for life, they are being threatened. They are being deprived of these basic things by an impossible war. Full disclosure, just so you don't feel that bad about it, a lot of churches, most churches did nothing. Congregational churches actually were one of the few to put up a fight. Today I'm sharing this story with you for a few reasons. I hope the most obvious reason goes without saying, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. What happened 75 years ago was horrifying. And growing up, I thought this would never happen. I didn't know better. Hopefully all of us do know better. And I hope it goes without saying that if something like this were to ever happen, we would do, here at First Congregational Portland, anything we could to stop it. Am I right? Right. Okay, just saying it out loud. The other reason I'm sharing this story with you is because of what happened, what Chiura Obata did once he was with his family and they were in the camp. First one in California, but later in Millard County, Utah. And trust me, I've been there, and this is in the middle of nowhere. Here's the rest of his account from April 30th, 1942. We were forced to leave our land, where we lived, and move into these stables. And this is a kind of sin which is intolerable. We have to do something about it. So, my first thought, not having many options, was to open an art school and start teaching everybody. And that is exactly what he did. Hello, Anne. Pull up a chair. Obata, Chiura Obata, opens an art school inside the internment camp, and it's amazingly successful. At one point, over 600 students from the age of 7 to 70 were all learning traditional Japanese painting techniques. They're all learning the art of kinseido, the living moment. Just 1 month after starting, in July 1942, the school had its first exhibit outside the camp. Because, of course, all of Obata's non-Japanese students from Berkeley are showing up, doing everything they can to find him and get to him. And even when they can't get through and actually see him, they are all pressing themselves up against the fences. His wife, Haruko Obata, once said they would cry, poor things. They would press themselves up and say, "Oh, Professor Obata, you are behind the fence." But he would answer always, "From my perspective, it is you who are beyond the fence." Obata's work inside the so-called Central Utah Relocation Center, it becomes transcendent. Maybe it's like, God, listen to all the works of Chiura Obata. Obata's work becomes transcendent. The juxtaposition of cruel barbed wire fence and shabby, ugly temporary structures contrasted with the backdrop of his beautiful skies, haunting desert horizons, so beautiful they seem to emanate directly from the American conscience itself. But for those still inside the camp, the work does something else, something more. Chiura Obata literally took the sky and the night and the desert air and the soil and the sounds of coyotes and birds, and he renders them as palpable, tangible realities of spirit and hope for everyone inside that art school. And I share this with you today because you deserve to know, to remember that there might come a time in your life where you can no longer afford for your faith to be theoretical. There may come a time where you, for whatever reason, can no longer bear to just have your religion be something that you think and talk about second-hand, but instead you might yearn for direct contact with God on your own. In these times, when they come, I hope you will remember the lessons of Jesus of Nazareth, but also of Chiura Obata. And specifically as Northwesterners, we have a kind of sacred thing in our backyards that we are not only able to go out and touch, and we should more, but that we are responsible to. There comes a time where we will have to touch peace and tranquility for ourselves. These things cannot be thought or read into being, but great nature is always right under our noses. Even if you make just a little time for grace, great nature will reveal itself to you only every time. Here is an address that Obata gave his students at the New Year's celebration in 1943, but it might as well be delivered to us here today. Have we noticed the beautiful mountains surrounding us that have existed for thousands of years? They show heaven and earth their greatness. They can't be moved, no matter how hard people may try. The sun and the moon have been shining forever, blessing the world. The mountains, the moon, and the sun, they never try to explain. When dark clouds hide the sun, they are blessed by the golden color of the sunlight behind them. At night, they are blessed by the moonlight, decorating their edges with a silver line. And we only hope that our little art school will follow the teachings of this great nature, that we too might endure like the mountains, and like the sun and the moon, we ourselves emit light. Let us close with a moment of silence. Because of course, great nature exists right here, even in the city, hidden in the park blocks, hidden in the stillness in between and underneath all our busyness. Let us practice the presence of great nature. Listen. God, let our soil be right. Let it not be too rocky or too shallow. And remind us always that we are never separate from the wider field of your creation, that the same waters flow through everything. Amen.